Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my first ever video. I will start this off by simply saying I'm going to be doing this as a relatively unprofessional impromptu thing. I see so much content online and so many ideas being shared, so many people sharing their opinions and thoughts on things. And as with all of us, I'm sure there's many ideas you agree with and many you don't, and that's the same for me. There's some I listen to what they say and God, they sound like geniuses. And others, I wonder why they even have the ability to be online like this and say their opinions. But with that being said, I figured I might as well start pitching in my personal opinion onto this online discourse, sharing my thoughts and getting people's feedback, and I'd love to hear what other people think of my opinions on things. So, with that, I'm just one man here sharing my opinion. Today, the thing that was on my mind is the separation of church and state. Fairly common statement, and in some rights, a fairly innocuous one, and in others, a fairly inflammatory one. And I bring it up because I think it's very interesting the perspective a lot of people have on it. And I feel like the true meaning of the separation of church and state has been lost to time, or not necessarily lost to time, but definitely lost in these times with a lot of people in the way they've learned it and think about it. So, through my interpretation of how a lot of people explain the separation of church and state, and the way I hear people reference it, is the government being the state, the leaders of any given country. If they are practicing true separation of church and state, they will make their decisions in government based entirely off of factual matters and will have no sway to their decisions based on their particular political beliefs or their particular religious beliefs on these matters. And personally, I think that's quite ridiculous. I mean, going back to the origin of it, the separation of church and state goes back to the early days where the Catholic Church, being one of the single largest entities of religion in the world, was a very heavily influenced in politics as well, where the Catholic Church, the Pope, and the bishops in whatever regions they were in were very close personally and politically with the leaders of these governments, and oftentimes had a lot of push and sway over the decisions that these governmental leaders made over laws and other such things. So, when it comes to the early separation of church and state, as far as I've been able to gather over my time looking at it in historical context, it seems as though the early meaning of it was that the church as an entity, because the church has its own leadership hierarchy, and as much as the Catholic Church is kind of the main focus of the times in the West, because the Catholic Church has been the largest religion for the most part in the Western world since easily 500 to 1000 AD time range. And during that time period, they obviously got into the politics and started controlling it in their own ways. And so the separation of church and state was that the hierarchy of the church should not be intervening in the decisions of the government. If the government of X country is passing a law on the punishment for murder in their country, the church can't step in and say, oh, murder is unforgivable, automatic death penalty, or vice versa, that you should be forgiving and don't be harsh on the punishments. They should not be able to step in and do that. They shouldn't be able to push the government to make alliances with different countries for whatever political favor gain they could get from that monetarily, or just the people they know, so on and so forth. And so the origin of it comes as more of a keep the two entities separate. And I won't say that I'm infallible by any means, of course. I could misunderstand that myself, but I've looked at it a lot and I can't seem to find a different reason for the beginning of that. I mean, even when they wanted the church out of the government, many of those people that were pushing for that were themselves fairly religious individuals. And this was all across Europe, America, the Western world where a lot of this was happening. And so then nowadays, where people oftentimes I hear pushing for, well, oh, this politician, he's making his decision based off of his religious beliefs. He voted for that because he's a Christian, and that goes against what most people in the country believe, and he shouldn't be doing that because he's Christian. He should go with what makes common logic sense. And I think that's utterly ridiculous. Now, I do believe all of our politicians have the necessity, like it is their duty to make logical, informed, reasonable decisions. But how can you reasonably expect somebody who grew up religious, who grew up learning to live by the Bible, by a Christian teaching, or by any other religion for that matter? I mean, I'm going with that because I'm Christian myself and it's obviously the dominant religion. But even if you go to Muslim, Hindu, uh, Buddhism, Judaism, any of these different religions that are profoundly prominent throughout the world and that so many people know and are aware of, how can you expect somebody who's lived their whole life raised by these ideals to not, in some capacity, make their decisions based off those ideals? I mean, you as an individual, I'm sure your parents instilled some level of this is good, that is bad in you. Or if not your parents, some other strong role model leader figure, whether it be a teacher, a family member, a neighbor, whoever else in your life. And so, how could it as an individual, I'm sure each of you can dissuade to that or understand that in some context and some level of understanding to it. So I get that our politicians have a different burden to them, but they're all still humans. So why would it be reasonable to expect that they and they alone have this burden to be completely and totally unaffected by their own upbringing, raising, and belief systems in the way that they make decisions? And you can say this to so many different things. I mean, just ideologically looking at the way people believe, you could say, "Oh, well, this guy does all the right things. He doesn't base his decisions off of religion and he's doing so well because of it." But everybody has their own religion in one sense or another. Even atheism is a religion. I mean, religion being simply a system of belief and rules deciding what's right for you. Pretty much everything is a religion. The atheists say that God isn't real and people who believe that God is real are dumb. How is that so far different from people who say God is real and people who don't believe God is real are dumb? I mean, it's the opposite perspective, but so many people approach it with this dogmatic belief of absolutism on it. And so when I look at it, it's like every single person in these positions has some level of their own, air quotes, religion that they believe and follow. And so it just seems somewhat ridiculous to me to push around this idea that separation of church and state means inherently making all decisions completely void of any influence from whatever religion an individual might believe in. And that's to say, there are obviously people who don't believe that's what it means. That's obviously not the all encompassing. But in my experience, it seems that more and more people seem to understand it in that way. At least the people that I have come across and had conversations like that with. And I guess it just confuses me and makes me wonder. I'm like, am I the insane one for thinking that or not? But I don't think I am. And genuinely, I'm looking at this like, why would you why would that be the expectation, is that somebody throws away all their ideals and morals when they make a decision just because they happen to have a leadership role? I mean, you don't expect an entrepreneur making their own company to throw away their religious beliefs. Somebody running a company, they might have a particular proclivity to whatever religion they have. They might hang crosses or put up religious emblems of whatever religion they're at in their store, in their place of business. And as a leader there, as somebody in charge, it's not expected of them to throw that away simply because they're now in a leadership role. So I guess the burden is somewhat different between a political office where you're in charge of so many people versus a individual company system, but I feel like the concept is the same. And the whole concept of the whole idea of this seems a little bit ridiculous to me, and it seems like to me a lot of people don't truly understand the origin of where this started and what the problem was in the first place, and have skewed it and taken it to a level far beyond what it was ever meant to be. I mean, even if you look back as an American, looking back at the founding fathers of America, pretty much all of them were religious, largely Christian, and they were on the side of separation of church and state. And so if they were religious and had decisions based on their religion, then how could it be expected that they were trying to say that no, nobody should make decisions based on their religion, when it seems to be the case that they themselves were making decisions based on their religion and the laws and ideas they put into the Constitution and into the Declaration of Independence and the early laws and set up for our country were so heavily influenced by their own Christian ideals. And so it seems unreasonable. So I suppose that's my little rant for right now. Again, fairly impromptu and just starting first video, trying to get a little bit used to the feel of it all. But I would greatly appreciate hearing anybody who wants to share their thoughts and opinions in the comments. Let me know. I'd love to hear it. And also any critiques on just my overall approach, format. Obviously, I'm going to be messing with how I do my recordings and such in the coming days and weeks. So I appreciate any and all feedback. And thank you all for coming. I'm just one man. That's my opinion. So y'all have a wonderful day. Bye.